Let me, man on the internet, ask you this. Did you notice the moment during the raid on Onigashima when Belmer appeared? And if your answer to this question is no, then you have missed something quite very big. But do not worry, because man on the internet is here to fill all of your holes, your knowledge holes at least, and tell you why you should be more hyped for Nami than ever. Hyped and or terrified, especially if your name is Ulti, an extremely curt brat who often speaks her mind directly to Kaido, just like how Nami speaks very directly to Luffy. There's this very cool level of respect for their captains without the need to shroud it in all sorts of nice, fluffy, sugary words. But Ulti is the Pachycephalus stepping stone that Nami needed to crush to awaken, and one of the very clever things about this conflict is that Oda planted the narrative seeds well before Nami and Ulti ever knew the other existed. And that was done with Luffy. When Luffy and Ulti cross paths, it is like they are looking into a mirror. Both of them rudely demand to know who the other is, and Luffy eventually replies, "I'm Luffy, the man who will become king of the pirates." And this is actually the line that begins the fight between Nami and Ulti, even though Nami's not even here. Don't know where she is. She's over there. Huh? The king of the pirates is obviously going to be Kaido, you ultra buffoon. I'll split your skull in two. Ulti is extremely similar to Luffy in a lot of ways. I'd say they share the same mental suburb, but they live on different streets. And this is most perfectly portrayed when Luffy and Ulti headbutt one another and both stare deeply into each other's eyes with the same determined gaze. And in fact, Ulti even has the same general style of eyes as Luffy, that wide-eyed, innocent, childlike look. Oda builds Ulti up to inhabit these very Luffy-like qualities, because that is what the test for Nami is going to be. Luffy's dream and declaration to become the Pirate King survives Ulti's assault. However, when the opponents are reshuffled, that burden now falls to Nami. Ulti attacks Nami to prove that Luffy will not become the Pirate King. Ulti is a direct challenge to that dream, and Nami is one piece in a large puzzle of straw hats, proving that Luffy will become the Pirate King by defeating an Emperor of the Sea. So Luffy's dream survived Ulti's assault on him, but will the dream survive the assault on Nami? And what makes this so difficult is, again, Ulti acts so much like Luffy, and so it's hard not to believe her when she makes declarations. And so while it's fine for Luffy to get past that, it is so much harder for Nami to overcome someone with Luffy's drive and belief. And then there's obviously the physical aspect. There is no way that Ulti would have ever won her brief fight against Luffy, but I would have loved to have seen it play out to conclusion without Yamato's interruption. In Ulti's hybrid form, Luffy even says that she's too strong, and he was about to have to activate Gear 4th to deal with her. And the fact that Ulti is able to push Luffy into using Gear 4th is real bad news if you're Nami. The strength differential here is almost like the original Luffy versus Kaido fight, where Luffy was beaten overwhelmingly and resoundingly, except the issue there turned out not so much to be a deficit of physical strength, but a deeper mastery and maturity of ability that Luffy had to hone in the weeks leading to the raid. But Ulti may as well be Kaido to Nami. That is the same gap of strength that we're talking about here. So Nami now has to defend Luffy's dream from an objectively insurmountable opponent. A lot of which takes place off screen, and so we don't see this happen. But when we cut back to the fight between Nami and Ulti, Nami has now suffered through multiple Ulti mortars, the same headbutt she used on Luffy, with Nami now on the ground, beaten, bloodied, and broken like we've never seen her before. And I really need to emphasize that Nami was thwacked multiple times, and what a superhuman show of willpower it is for her to even be conscious. Nami isn't Luffy. She doesn't negate physical damage. She's not Sanji with his modified exoskeleton, and she's certainly not Zoro, who's perpetually drunk enough to dull any and all pain. No, Nami is just a regular, sober human. Nami taking an Ulti mortar is like you being headbutted by Ulti. Do you think that you would survive? And I'm honestly amazed that Nami's skull hasn't been blown open. But the reason why such violence was occurring to begin with was due to Ulti's rage at Luffy claiming that he'd become the Pirate King, something Ulti firmly believed that Kaido was destined to become, causing a philosophical impasse. And something I do really need to praise Ulti for is her belief in Kaido. Even if she was a villain, it's very difficult not to respect that level of faith and belief that she had. It was just as strong as any of the Straw Hats' faith in Luffy, and that was the real big problem here. This fight, as with many other battles in One Piece, was not a direct contest of strength. It was a battle of belief, and whose belief was stronger? Ulti's faith in Kaido becoming the Pirate King, or Nami's faith in Luffy? And unfortunately, a lot of Ulti's physical rage was being taken out on Nami, and Ulti decided to keep headbutting Nami until until she stated that Luffy would never become king of the pirates. And in fact, that may explain why Nami's skull wasn't blown right the crap open, other than because this is a shonen manga and we probably don't want to brutally murder one of our protagonists. But I suspect that Ulti was probably holding back a bit, because what was happening here was more like torture than a battle. Ulti was interrogating Nami and trying to extract what she wanted by giving head in all of the ways it is that no one wants. Ulti didn't want to break Nami's skull, she wanted to break Nami's belief by pushing her to the very edge of physical endurance, which Nami did reach, even saying that one more headbutt would kill her. And so Nami had to make a choice. She either had to sacrifice her belief in Luffy, or she had to sacrifice herself for her belief. And while this is happening on the sidelines, we have the much more important to this event than you would initially think Usopp, thinking that Nami is just gonna lie, and he's even mentally encouraging her to lie. Do it, Nami. Tell the not truth. Because I mean, that's the obvious solution to this, right? Ulti just wants to hear you say that Luffy will never become the Pirate King, and then she'll move on to whatever else it is that dinosaurs do. So just lie, mate. It is the easiest thing in the world, and eventually Nami acquiesces. Okay, I'll say it. Luffy will never stop until he's king of the pirates, which is one of my favorite Straw Hat lines in the entire series, and something that really made me sit up and take post-time skip Nami a hell of a lot more seriously, because there is so much more behind this line and behind this decision than you may initially realize amongst all of the other chaos happening during the raid on Onigashima. And what goes very much under the radar is that this whole scene is a reference to the final moments of Belle-Mère. Arlong had her completely physically outclassed. Belle-Mère did her best with her marine skills that used to pay her marine bills, but just like Nami versus Ulti, physicality was never an option against Arlong. And here, Belle-Mère had to make a choice. In order to survive, all she needed to do was lie about having children. She was even encouraged to do so by Genzo, sort of like how Usopp was encouraging Nami to lie against Ulti. All you have to do is say you don't have kids. All you have to do is say that Luffy will never become the Pirate King. And Nami made the same choice as Belle-Mère did. Sorry, Genzo, I just can't say I don't have children, even if it costs me my life. They're as much mine as if I gave birth to them. Those two are my children, which she said covered in blood, tears, and resolve, which was Nami's exact state with Ulti. Here, Nami was 100% channeling Belle-Mère's final moments, and she completely understood why Belle-Mère made the decision that she did. If Belle-Mère had lied to Arlong, then it would have been a self-fulfilling prophecy. That lie would have become truth. Nami and Nojiko would not have been allowed to stay in Kokiyashi Village for their own sake, and they would have effectively ceased to be Belle-Mère's children. And if Nami had lied about Luffy becoming the Pirate King, then she would be killing his dream by turning that into another self-fulfilling prophecy, because it would show that his crew do not have the sheer belief necessary to turn his dream into reality. She's not the first Straw Hat to have had this moment, and she probably won't be the last. But here Nami made the choice that she would rather die than have someone else dictate her feelings. And I'm sure that Belle-Mère was watching this as an extremely proud mother up in heaven, which is a thing that may canonically exist in the One Piece world. It's a bit vague and involves a lot of talk about spirits, which also exist. But I want it to be true, if for no other reason, for Belle-Mère to see this and realize what an amazing daughter she raised. Beautiful moment. However, I do think there is some criticism during this conflict to be offered towards story lord Eiichiro Oda, namely for having all of Ulti's headbutts on Nami take place off screen, because this isn't something that Oda would ever do with a character who isn't Nami or Robin. I think Oda did this because post-time skip he has a lot of trouble drawing his female characters taking serious damage, and to him it just doesn't feel right to draw a woman precious to him being beaten up, which is why all of the implications are there, all of the damage was there without seeing the actual act itself. However, I do think that lessens the impact of what happens, because what Oda has set up here is the drama of Nami up against an iron wall. She is face to face with her own personal Kaido. And it's not that I'm overly eager for violence and bloodlust and just want to see people get beaten up, but I do think back on a lot of the greatest moments of overcoming adversity in One Piece, and a lot of them happen to belong to Usopp, someone who is, at least according to Oda, physically weaker than Nami. And what specifically comes to mind is when he got hit by Mr. Four's bat. This was one of the most brutal pages in the series, where Oda even had an X-ray shot of Usopp's nose shattering. Absolute cinema. But here, Usopp was in the same situation as Nami would be against Ulti, because just prior to this, Miss Merry Christmas had been making fun of Luffy and his dream to become the Pirate King, and that need to fight for Luffy's Luffy's dream is what powered Usopp into standing up after taking that absurdly brutal hit, and that is where Usopp gives his speech about his faith in Luffy. But I think that speech only hits as hard as it does because we saw Usopp get hit as hard as he did. If we didn't see that bat connect with his face, then it would make it a lot harder for us to empathize with the pain that he is pushing through. And the fact that in this moment he is ready to give up his life for Luffy's dream. He knows another bat is coming straight towards him, and he's just like, mate, if this is it, this is it. So I really do feel like Oda should have drawn one Ulti mortar hitting Nami, maybe instead of showing Usopp being hit by it multiple times, which only exists as a proxy experience to convey what Nami endured previously. But it honestly, I don't know, it just doesn't quite have the same punch to it. That's my one criticism of a moment that otherwise blew me away, but that is just part one. The battle for belief then concludes with Nami's victory. However, a new fight between Nami and Ulti immediately commences after Tama arrives, and she becomes the focal point for the rest of the conflict. And I think this is quite a brilliant mood shift. Things could have ended with Nami's moment, but that wouldn't really be right, would it? Because Nami has now matured to the point where she has fully taken on the will of Belmare. Nami is no longer a child in this scenario. She has become a mentor figure, and so it becomes Nami's elected responsibility to protect Tama just as Belmare protected her. And it needs to be noted that after this point, Nami is noticeably more powerful. She's able to fight off Ulti with increasing confidence and damage dealt. And that's because protecting children is one of Nami's most enduring themes in One Piece. In fact, before the raid commences, Nami realizes that Kinemon is worried about Momonosuke, which results in a genuine smile for Nami, which is very unusual for a Nami-Kinemon interaction. These two characters usually don't go that well together because Kinemon's perverted nature usually just leads to a very angry Nami, or just a failure to connect because of his more traditional ways versus Nami's more modern mindset. However, this is one moment, possibly even the only moment, where Nami and Kinemon connect. And so Nami says to leave Momonosuke to them. So Nami's original purpose was to retrieve Momonosuke, but then a lot of things happened, and where we've landed is protecting Tama. Meanwhile, Ulti's focus switches away from Nami and onto Tama because Tama interrupted the fight, and also because she was turning all of the Smile users against the Beast Pirates using her Devil Fruit ability. So you've now got Ulti who wants to split Tama's skull open, and Nami who would very much prefer that did not happen. To enhance things further, this is also when Big Mom storms in and becomes a key element of this conflict, and this wasn't just a random flourish of chaos by Oda. He specifically placed Big Mom here because the theme of this fight had now switched to children, and there's no one more perfect to consult on this matter than the world's most horrifically prolific mother. Big Mom remembers Tama from when she had amnesia and goes into what Prometheus calls mother mode, which happens, quote, every now and then with little children, but apparently didn't happen when Kaido tried to execute Momonosuke. And it is here that Ulti makes the mistake that seals her fate. Ulti hits Tama pretty viciously, which triggers both Nami and Big Mom to form the world's most unlikely alliance due to their mutual desire to protect Tama. And so now we are solidifying Nami's mentor status by aligning her with the surprisingly rotund manifestation of motherhood, which despite Big Mom being a rather twisted representation of, is what Belmare was all about. And also, this is where Nami decides to stop running away. Instead, Nami says, I'm going to stay here and crush her. Her being Ulti, and the sentence in general being one of the coldest things that a non-Zoro Straw Hat has ever said. And as much of a tank as Ulti is, she is brought down by a series of attacks from both Big Mom and Nami, with Nami getting in the final hit. And so Ulti becomes the first high-ranking Beast Pirate to fall to a Straw Hat during the raid. Remembering the Big Mom one-shot page 1 for burning down Okobore Town, which he didn't do, but got punished for it regardless. And the week that this chapter came out in the manga, I recall a fair bit of online controversy, which is not at all uncommon in the Wano arc, especially around this time. By this point, we had spent about 3.5 years on the island, so people were feeling a bit reckless and quick to criticism, quickicism if you will. And so there was some pushback and disappointment with Nami not overcoming Ulti on her own, but that very much misses the point of what Oda was trying to do with this fight. Again, this was never designed as a physical fight for Nami to win. This wasn't a missed double finger or a Caliphate scenario, and in fact, very few fights are designed that way for any Straw Hat to just brute force your way through. Generally, they're about rigorously testing a certain inner aspect of the character, and Nami passed both of those tests. She took an extremely important step in her development by coming full circle and Belmaring herself, for want of a better term, although that one's pretty good. And while it may not have been fair for Ulti to have incurred the wrath of Big Mom, it also wasn't fair for Ulti to target and beat up a child. So she very much brought this on herself, and I would make make the argument that it was Nami's personal values that won the day and were rewarded with that ever so brief alliance with an Emperor of the Sea. I'd also call it a victory for motherhood in general, although I can see where people are coming from. Nami is a combat drought character, so we rarely get decent action from her, and while it would be nice to have a few more of those one-on-one encounters like I mentioned before, California, Miss Doublefinger, at this stage I also don't know how much sense it would make. We are too deep into the new world now, and it's pretty rough to put Nami in a one-on-one position without power boosting her to frankly absurd levels. So I very much prefer the path that Oda has chosen here, where it's not so much about the muscle, the bone, or even the brain being tested, it is about the various inequalities that Nami has. And I also don't think this fight gets anywhere near enough credit for just how complicated it was. Because after the Battle of Belief, what happens is a bunch of complex character dynamics. Tama tells Big Mom about Okobore Town, so Big Mom knocks out page 1, which prompts Ulti to hit Tama, which then prompts Nami and Big Mom to attack Ulti, but Tama then runs away, which makes Big Mom remember being abandoned by Mother Carmel, so she attacks the Straw Hats and Tama, which causes Eustace Kid to step in because he has a grudge against Big Mom, and all the while we've got this melodrama happening with Zeus trying to figure out his cloudsome place in the world, and only after all of that do we get back to Ulti, who was the main focus of the fight. So it's actually incredibly impressive how seamlessly Oda was able to blend these threads into one another in this one event, all of which culminating in Nami's finest hour in post-time skip One Piece so far.